Hey guys, tonight we venture into a story so strange, so quietly unsettling, that it will sneak into your dreams like a whisper through jungle leaves. You're standing on a cracked tile floor of a once sterile lab, vines curling through broken windows, dust dancing in sleepy beams of moonlight. There's a crib, oddly placed next to a large steel cage. Inside that cage, a blanket, a few toys, and tiny handprints on the glass. This is no haunted asylum tale. No, this was a real experiment, one where a baby boy was raised side by side with a baby chimpanzee, not observed in passing, raised identically. You probably won't survive this story with your worldview untouched. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere unusual, like a hammock in the Philippines or under a blanket in Minnesota, drop your location and the time in the comments. I love seeing where these sleepy journeys reach. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the tall grass of 1930s America, not exactly the golden age of child psychology. Freud's shadow still lingers. Pavlov is still ringing bells in textbooks. And B.F. Skinner is a young academic who hasn't yet turned cribs into air-conditioned baby tanks. It's a time of curiosity unburdened by modern ethics. And into that space steps a man named Winthrop Kellogg. His name sounds like a cereal magnate. But trust me, he was anything but sweet. Kellogg was a psychologist at Indiana University with a flair for the theatrical and a dangerous amount of faith in the scientific method. He'd already published research on behavior and learning, but what he really wanted was to build a human from scratch. Well, not literally, but close enough. Kellogg believed that nurture could outpower nature, that with the right conditions, you could raise a chimpanzee into something human, or perhaps raise a human without all the messy cultural noise, and see what emerged. What better way to test this than by raising two infants side by side? One human, one chimp, same bottle, same schedule, same nursery rhymes. No. This isn't the plot of a dystopian novel. This is the real-life experiment that began in 1931. It was called the Comparative Psychological Study of Infant Development in Human and Chimpanzee. But let's be honest, it was basically the parent trap. If Haley Mills had fur and opposable toes, you're in Orange Park, Florida, where Kellogg has taken up a post at the Yale-affiliated Yerkes Primate Center. It's hot, the kind of sticky, slow southern heat where fans hum all day, and bugs thump against screens like they want to get in on the science. Inside a modest home-turned lab, the cribs are placed side by side. One for his 10-month-old biological son, Donald. The other for a 7.5-month-old female chimpanzee named Gua, borrowed from the center. No, Gua is not short for anything. That's just her name. You may chuckle now. Both babies are diapered, swaddled, bathed in the same water, and given identical routines. When Donald gets orange juice, so does Gua. When Gua plays with blocks, so does Donald. They're even measured and weighed on the same scale. The only thing different is their DNA, and that, according to Kellogg, might not matter much. From the very beginning, the lines blur. Gua is stronger, faster. She learns to walk, or rather scuttle, sooner. She can hang from a ledge and swing by one arm before Donald can even pull himself up. Donald, on the other hand, cries more often, sleeps less, and seems overall more helpless. You're watching a side-by-side race between two species. And for the first few months, the chimp appears to be winning. Kellogg records everything. Every reflex, every babble, every blink. He times reactions with a stopwatch. He tests their memory with toys hidden behind pillows. He even introduces both babies to the family dog. noting how Gua is cautious but curious, while Donald just drools. It's funny, but also weirdly sad. Because beneath the data and the doting lies something unsettling. These children are not being raised for love. They're being raised for data. One mainstream historical fact to tuck into your pillow tonight. The 1930s were a golden age for what some call human zoo science. Researchers around the world, particularly in Europe, were still obsessed with primitive development. Displays of African tribespeople were not uncommon at world fairs. Kellogg's experiment, while seemingly domestic and well-meaning, grew from that same twisted curiosity. What makes us human? And can it be replicated? A quirkier detail? Kellogg often played jazz records to see how the infants would react rhythmically. Gua apparently liked Louis Armstrong more than Donald did. Yes, that's in the notes. Historians still argue whether Kellogg truly believed he could humanize Gua, or if he was really just trying to de-animalize his own child for the sake of academic acclaim. Whatever the motive, the result was a strange, sometimes sweet, often disturbing glimpse into parallel development. At night, the babies are put to bed together. Their cribs share a room. Gua nestles into her blanket, watching Donald with those dark, deep eyes that chimpanzees have. Eyes that seem to know more than they should. And Donald? He stares back, curious, maybe even comforted, or maybe confused, because even as infants, they must sense something's not quite right. So you settle in, too. Just like Donald, in a world where the line between species is smudged by science, and where your playmate might pick fleas off you with surprising tenderness, close your eyes. The fan hums. The jungle nursery quiets. And somewhere out there, a baby chimp reaches for a rattle. You're sitting cross-legged on the linoleum floor of that humid Florida lab, leafing through Dr. Kellogg's notes as the fan lazily spins above you. It smells faintly of chalk dust, citrus cleanser, and the lingering musk of monkey biscuits. Everything in this room pulses with one man's obsession, a gentle madness camouflaged as research. Winthrop Kellogg isn't your average academic in a stiff collar and tweed. He's a hybrid of psychologist, showman, and silent-era mad scientist, scribbling into notebooks while jazz blares in the background. Born in 1898, Kellogg grew up fascinated by behavior, why people do what they do, and how much of that can be tweaked. This was a man who didn't just want to understand the mind, he wanted to rewire it. And, the ideas he chased. Before Donald and Gua, Kellogg had already made waves by questioning everything from instinct to identity. He once ran experiments trying to train cows to eat meat, which they did, unhappily. He theorized about eliminating fear reactions in babies using soothing stimuli. At one point, he even pondered whether laughter was a biological flaw, a sort of mental hiccup, and whether it could be suppressed through conditioning. You're looking at someone who stared at the rules of nature and said, but what if not? That's how we get to the grand and, yes, ridiculous idea of cross-fostering species. The concept wasn't entirely new. In fact, it had roots in fringe biology and scattered colonial stories about children raised by wolves, apes, or even ostriches. The so-called feral children were cautionary tales, romanticized by Victorian writers and sensationalist newspapers. But Kellogg? He wanted to bring science to the myth. He believed, fervently, that chimpanzees could be raised into something more human if exposed early enough to human social structures. Think of it like psychological terraforming. And his lab wasn't just a workspace. It was an emotional incubator, a social greenhouse. You're watching a man build his own hypothesis with living creatures, his own son included. That's where this veers into something deeply personal. Donald wasn't just a participant. He was the control group, the test case, the mirror against which Gua would be measured. Imagine being so committed to a theory that you voluntarily subject your only child to a lifelong comparison with another species. It's the kind of parenting choice that makes helicopter moms look tame. Kellogg's wife, Luella, went along with it, not just reluctantly, but with enthusiasm. A trained psychologist herself, she administered many of the tests. It's hard to tell if she truly believed in the mission, or if she simply believed in her husband. Either way, she was all in. The family dynamic, for those 9 months, became a triangle of oddity. Winthrop the analyst, Luella the handler, and 2 tiny creatures caught in the eye of a scholarly storm. And through it all, Kellogg keeps obsessively collecting data. He designs over 200 individual tests to measure reflexes, problem-solving, emotional expression, and sensory reactions. Donald and Gua are poked, prodded, and prompted dozens of times a day. They're introduced to mirrors, balloons, lemons, and even mild electric buzzers. Yes, really. All of it is tracked on rigid grids. The results reduced to tidy numbers. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. At the time, comparative psychology was exploding in the U.S. Institutions like Yale, Johns Hopkins, and Harvard were pumping out behaviorist theories by the minute. The idea of using animals, especially primates, as stand-ins for humans was not just accepted. It was celebrated. Kellogg was, in many ways, riding the intellectual wave of his time. But here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Kellogg insisted on testing Gua's sense of morality. One experiment involved a fake, injured researcher pretending to be in distress in front of the infants, to see who would respond with concern. According to his notes, Gua rushed over with what seemed like worry. Donald, however, ignored the man and kept chewing on a block. Interpret that how you will. And now, the big gray cloud hanging over this circus tent. Historians still argue whether Kellogg's methods crossed ethical lines or simply reflected the standards of his era. Today, of course, using your own child in an experiment like this would be career-ending, possibly criminal. But in the 1930s, it was groundbreaking, sort of. In the way that building your own rocket out of kitchenware is groundbreaking until you set your eyebrows on fire, Kellogg published articles. He gave lectures. The scientific world took cautious interest. Some saw a visionary. Others saw a man with too many chimps and not enough oversight. There were whispers in university corridors, frowns in faculty lounges. But Kellogg pressed forward. This was his life's work. And it was only just beginning. So now, back in that over-warm house, you glance over at the crib and see Donald chewing on a rubber spoon, eyes glassy in the afternoon light. Next to him, Gua is grooming a teddy bear with tiny, precise fingers. Kellogg stands nearby, stopwatch ticking, scribbling his findings. Luella hums a lullaby. Somewhere, the family dog barks at the scent of orange peels. And you? You're already starting to wonder if this whole thing might go too far. If the baby boy might become a little too wild. Or the chimp a little too human. But we're only just getting started. You wake up in the middle of a Florida summer, sweat sticking your shirt to your spine, as you hear the faintest sounds of baby babble and high-pitched chimpanzee hoots bouncing off the tile floor. Somewhere nearby, a milk bottle rolls to a stop. You stretch your neck and peek into the nursery where it all unfolds. Donald, the human baby, is cooing softly, while Gua, the chimpanzee, is hanging upside down from the edge of a chair, one tiny foot grasping the slats like a jungle gym bar. Welcome to the home laboratory of the Kellogg family. Equal parts playroom and psychological test chamber. The babies are now nearly identical in size. Donald is a little over a year old. Gua is approaching 11 months. To an untrained eye, they could be siblings, But look closer. One has smooth, baby-fat cheeks. The other a delicate, fur-covered face with dark, expressive eyes. They both wear the same onesie. They both drink the same formula. And, astonishingly, they both reach for the same teddy bear at exactly the same time. This isn't casual playtime. It's an experiment unfolding in real time. In the Kellogg household, everything is synchronized. Feeding schedules, naps, potty breaks, playtime, it's all mirrored. And this isn't for convenience. It's to eliminate as many variables as possible. Kellogg wants to measure the effects of environment on two different species raised under identical conditions. Think of it like psychological cloning, but with a chimpanzee and a baby instead of a test tube. They bathe together. They're weighed together. Even medical checkups happen in tandem. When one gets vaccinated, so does the other. If Donald cries during the night, Gua is woken too. Parallel lives isn't just a metaphor here. It's a literal operating principle. And as it turns out, Gua is good at being a baby. Maybe too good. She learns to drink from a cup faster than Donald. She solves basic mechanical puzzles, like sliding open a box or flipping a latch, well before he can manage them. Her memory for where toys are hidden, sharper. Her reaction times, quicker. Kellogg notes, almost with disbelief, that Gua seems smarter than his own son. One historical fact to fold into your sleepy brain here. Chimpanzees develop more rapidly than human infants in the early months. Their motor coordination, problem-solving, and memory are often more advanced at equivalent ages. But that gap eventually closes and reverses. Human brains take longer to mature, but surpass chimp brains in complexity and abstract thought over time. Still, in these early months, the scoreboard feels one-sided, and Donald? He doesn't seem to mind. He follows Gua's lead, fascinated. He watches her climb, shriek, and tug at shoelaces. Soon, he starts mimicking her behavior, not the other way around. He crawls the way she crawls, belly low, arms splayed. He responds to whistles. He claps when she hoots, in one moment burned into Kellogg's notes. Donald copies Gua's way of opening a cabinet with his foot. With his foot. Luella snaps a photograph. Both babies on the floor, toes flexed, cabinet ajar. Faces alight with discovery. And the potty training? You'll love this. Kellogg boasts that Gua becomes fully toilet-trained before Donald does. That's right. The chimp beats the baby at basic hygiene. Imagine trying to explain that at a future family reunion. Here's your quirky detail of the night. Gua was taught to wear toddler shoes. Tiny leather booties with little laces. She hated them at first, but eventually came to accept them, until she started untying Donald's shoes and tossing them in protest, as if to say, if I'm wearing these, so is he. So, but not everything is cute, because as time stretches on, the roles blur. You start to notice something strange in Donald's expressions. He begins copying not just Gua's actions, but her sounds. While Gua hoots and squeaks with delight, Donald starts shrieking too. At first, it's innocent enough, a curious mimicry. But it doesn't stop. Soon, Donald is barking when he's excited. He growls during frustration. He begins using chimpanzee-like vocalizations more than words. While Gua cannot speak, chimpanzees lack the vocal tract flexibility for human speech. Donald is entirely capable of forming words, yet chooses not to. Not often. Anyway, Kellogg notes a temporary regression in Donald's speech development. Temporary is doing some heavy lifting there. Historians still argue whether this language delay was significant, or whether it fell within the normal range of early childhood variability. Some experts insist it was environmental interference, Donald spending too much time imitating Gua, Others say it may have been simple coincidence. But in that nursery, it's hard not to draw connections. You sit beside the cribs late one evening. Donald clutches a plush giraffe. Gua grooms his hair gently with tiny fingers. The only sound is the rhythmic tapping of a toy hammer on wood, followed by an eerie harmony. Donald's baby laugh and Gua's answering cackle. It's sweet and odd, and maybe just a little chilling. Because while Kellogg hoped to teach the chimp to be more like a human, what he may be doing instead is pulling his own child toward the wild. And there's the question hanging over everything. What happens when the boy and the chimp both become toddlers? Will they fight? Will they confuse identity? Or worse, will they become mirrors that reflect the very worst of each other's instincts? No answers yet, but the clock ticks forward. And just outside, in the sweltering dusk, a mockingbird chirps. Gua cocks her head to listen. Donald, watching her, does the same. Morning arrives with the squawk of a parrot from a nearby enclosure and the screech of a high chair being dragged across the kitchen floor. You rub your eyes and glance toward the feeding area, where breakfast is underway. Gua is perched upright in her chair, head cocked to one side, observing with laser focus. Donald sits beside her. Banana mush smeared across his cheeks, hand dangling a spoon like a conductor's baton. Kellogg stands over them with his clipboard, stopwatch in one hand, pencil in the other. His eyes move between the two babies, calculating, analyzing, trying to catch the exact moment a behavior crosses the line from animal to human, or human to animal. This is the phase where things get weird, because at first, the plan had been scientific, controlled, rational, but as the days roll into weeks, then months, you start to feel it. The edges fraying, the definitions blurring, and the narrative slipping into something less clinical and more chaotic. Donald and Gua aren't just being observed anymore, they're beginning to react to the observation, to each other, and to the unspoken rules of their artificial world. You watch as Kellogg initiates a simple game. A bell rings, a treat is placed under one of two cups, and the babies must choose the correct one. Gua nails it. Donald hesitates, distracted by a dust mote. Another round, Gua again scores. Donald fumbles, and then it begins. The mimicry escalates. Donald sees Gua press her lips to a mirror and begins doing the same, leaving baby-sized smudges. Gua claps to a rhythm from the phonograph. Donald tries to clap like her, even matching the exact tempo of her oddly syncopated chimp claps. When Gua swings from the side of a crib, Donald tries to swing too, awkwardly, dragging a pillow off the side and tumbling into a heap. You start to ask yourself who's leading and who's following. The phrase monkey see, monkey do was never meant to apply in reverse. But here, it's happening, and no one, not even Kellogg, can quite explain it. Here's a historical fact to chew on with your midnight snack. Mimicry is a key developmental strategy in early childhood. Babies learn by observing and copying. They mimic facial expressions, sounds, even emotional responses. It's how empathy, language, and culture are passed down. But mimicry without boundaries, that's a psychological free-for-all. And Donald, it seems, is copying everything. He starts to crawl more than walk. He emits guttural chirps when excited. He becomes agitated if Gua is removed from the room, even for a few minutes. Once, when Gua is taken for a routine checkup, Donald screams and bites his crib rail until she returns. Luella, usually the calm center of the experiment, writes in her private journal that she's concerned, that Donald's behavior has become unsettling, and that she worries about long-term effects. But Kellogg? He doubles down. He argues that this is the perfect moment in the study. the point where the human brain, still pliable, shows just how deeply environment can shape behavior. To him, Donald is still on track, just detouring slightly through the jungle. And Gua? She's changing too. Her facial expressions become increasingly human-like. She learns to shake her head, no, a gesture she never used before. When corrected, she covers her face with her hands in what Kellogg calls a shy gesture, mimicked directly from Luella. Here's your quirky tidbit. Gua also learns to open doorknobs, not through trial and error, but by watching Luella do it once. The chimpanzee baby is now casually opening doors and wandering the house. You can't help but picture her trotting into the kitchen at 2 a.m., casually helping herself to some toast. Casually. Historians still argue whether Gua's apparent humanization was actual learning or simply trained performance. Was she internalizing social behaviors, or just playing an elaborate game of charades for snacks and approval? The truth is buried somewhere in those now yellowed lab journals, written in Kellogg's tidy, excited scrawl. But if Gua is evolving, Donald is devolving, or perhaps just drifting sideways. The day comes when Donald, frustrated with a toy, lets out a sharp chimp-like screech and slaps it off the table. Luella gasps. Kellogg makes a note. And Gua? Gua leans over, retrieves the toy, and gently hands it back. There's something uncomfortably human in her eyes, something reflective. Or maybe it's just the lamplight catching the glassy sheen. Either way, it sends a chill up your spine. The neighbors begin to notice, too. Though the experiment is mostly private, Kellogg has published a few early findings in academic circles. A local paper runs a blurb. Baby boy and chimpanzee raised as twins. Can science tame instinct? The article is part curiosity, part cautionary tale, and then the grocer starts whispering. A family friend comes to visit and leaves early, muttering that Donald looked like he was about to climb the curtains. Luella begins avoiding visitors. Still, the experiment continues. You watch as Donald and Gua sit together, painting with pudding on butcher paper. Gua smears deliberate spirals. Donald follows with streaks and handprints. When Gua dips her fingers in milk and flings it at the wall, Donald erupts in joyful imitation. And then it happens. The line bends so far it begins to crack. During one of Kellogg's sensory response tests, Donald refuses to cooperate. He huffs, growls, and throws the test object. When Kellogg attempts to redirect him, Donald bares his teeth and bites his father on the hand. Not a nibble, a bite. And just across the room, Gua watches silently, her wide eyes unblinking. Later that night, the house falls quiet. Donald sleeps. Gua perches on the edge of her bed, swaying slightly. The window is cracked open, the sounds of cicadas and distant owl calls drifting in. The line between boy and beast no longer feels like a line. It feels like a smudge. You sit on the floor, wondering what tomorrow might bring. Wondering who, if anyone, will remember which crib was originally meant for the human child. The house has taken on the eerie quiet of early dawn, where the air feels dense and nothing stirs but the occasional creak of floorboards settling. You sit alone in the living room, watching the light shift across the wallpaper as Kellogg enters. Bleary-eyed but clipboard ready. It's testing day. Again. Because in this world, every giggle, stumble, and tantrum is something to be timed, measured, graphed. This is the data phase. The spreadsheets swell. The results grow heavy. Kellogg believes in structure. God help him. He does. He's filled stacks of notebooks with notes on everything from Gua's blink reflex to the way Donald kicks a ball across the kitchen tiles. Each motion is a variable. Each reaction is a data point. The house has stopped feeling like a home and more like a machine for generating charts. Today's test? Object permanence. Kellogg hides a toy behind a curtain. Donald blinks. Gua lunges, pulls the curtain aside, and claims the prize with a triumphant hoot. The stopwatch clicks. Another note scrawled, another test, another day, another piece of the puzzle that refuses to fit neatly. Kellogg introduces more elaborate experiments. He plays recorded sounds, buzzers, bells, animal calls, to test reactions. He switches familiar routines. He gives Gua milk in Donald's cup and watches for protest. He gives Donald Gua's toys and checks for confusion. It's constant, unrelenting. And while all this is happening, Gua's development seems to plateau. She learns faster, earlier, but there's a ceiling. She does not speak, not a word, not even a syllable of English. She gestures, nods, even seems to understand basic instructions, but her vocal cords refuse to follow. Meanwhile, Donald's own speech is becoming less human. You sit with the data and notice something troubling. Kellogg's original hope had been that Gua would evolve toward humanity, that under the right environmental conditions, nature would yield. But as the results roll in, it's not looking good. Gua cannot grasp language, not like a human child. No matter how much she copies Donald's gestures or plays pat a cake, her biology stops her short of speech. Here's a mainstream historical fact to murmur to yourself as you drift. Chimpanzees lack the descended larynx and fine vocal control needed for human speech. Their brains, though complex, aren't wired for grammar or syntax. The gap isn't just cultural, it's anatomical. But Kellogg, ever the optimist, keeps pushing. He introduces written language, simple flashcards, pictures of apples, chairs, faces. Gua taps the cards. She associates some with objects, but there's no language spark, just recognition, mimicry. And Donald? He watches it all, growing quieter. There's a haunting moment noted in Kellogg's journal. During a test, he asks Donald, "What does the cow say?" Donald answers, "Moo." Then he turns to Gua and asks, "What does Gua say?" Donald opens his mouth wide and lets out a loud, guttural chimp scream. Silence follows. Luella sets down her pen. Kellogg freezes. Gua tilts her head, maybe flattered. Donald, smiling proudly, begins clapping. You feel it now. The experiment isn't just recording behavior, it's shaping it. Here's your quirky tidbit. Kellogg once tested both babies' startled responses by sneaking up behind them and popping a paper bag. Gua flinched and climbed up a chair. Donald flinched and imitated Gua climbing the chair. Reflex as mimicry, learned fear, copied survival. Historians still argue whether these results were true reflections of development or contaminated by the strange intimacy of the setting. Can a baby be a valid test subject when that baby is also your son? Can a chimp ever truly be neutral in a house full of human speech and scented candles? It's not just Gua and Donald being tested, it's the very boundary of the scientific method, and it's starting to falter. Luella. Once the calm documentarian, now flinches when Donald screeches. She begins limiting test times. She shields Donald from more intense sensory trials. Her maternal instinct is rising, slowly but firmly, pushing back against the man with the clipboard. But Kellogg keeps going. He tries empathy tests next, pretending to cry, pretending to hurt himself. Gua watches carefully, even offering a toy in response once. Donald, meanwhile, mirrors the behavior. When Kellogg clutches his foot and groans in mock pain, Donald frowns, then clutches his own foot and groans too. The data piles up. Yes, but the story it tells is slipping beyond the bounds of tidy analysis. You watch as Gua taps her bowl when she wants food. An unprompted gesture. A clear signal. Kellogg beams. But then Donald taps his bowl too, despite having already eaten. Not for food, but attention. It's no longer clear who's learning from whom, or even what they're learning. There's a sense, now, that the experiment is running the Kelloggs more than they are running it. Gua begins to develop a sense of self. She recognizes her reflection in a mirror. She smiles at it. She gestures to herself. Donald, seeing this, starts to mimic again, but his smile seems off, too wide, almost unnatural. He copies not from joy, but habit. You jot down a mental note. This doesn't feel like childhood anymore. It feels like mimicry layered over mimicry, a hall of behavioral mirrors. And then it happens. One quiet morning, during another measurement session. Donald refuses to participate. He covers his ears. He buries his face in a towel. When Kellogg tries to coax him with a toy, Donald bats it away and growls. Gua watches silent. It's no longer an experiment about development. It's become a study of confusion. Confusion in the child. Confusion in the parents. And a slow, mounting dread that perhaps the question shouldn't have been whether a chimp could become human, but whether a human could forget he was one. And outside, the trees rustle. The lab fans whir. Inside, Kellogg lifts his pen to mark another data point, but all you can hear is the quiet hush of something unraveling. The silence has changed. It's not the restful quiet of nap time anymore. It's charged, heavy, as if the house itself is holding its breath. You watch Luella pace more now. Her hands worry the hem of her apron. She no longer sits in the observation room. She's taken to reading children's books aloud, not for Gua, but for Donald. And Donald no longer responds with words. He listens, blank-faced, clutching his blanket like a talisman. Gua, meanwhile, thrives. She mimics door handles, opens jars, unscrews a bottle cap with her toes. She sits in the corner with building blocks and stacks them in color order. She knows the schedule better than you do. When the test bell rings, she scampers into place. Ready, you feel a twist in your gut. She's become the perfect student. Kellogg starts wearing a lab coat at home. He says it's to keep the experimental atmosphere consistent, but it feels more like armor, a barrier, as if dressing the part might preserve some illusion of control. Luella watches from the kitchen, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She doesn't speak much anymore. Not during testing, not after. Donald has developed a new sound. It's not a word. It's not even a sound he used to make. It's a low, hooting hum, almost musical. He makes it when he wants attention, when he's tired, when he's afraid, and Gua answers him, not in words, in tone, in mimicry. The two hum to each other now, back and forth like dolphins, like whales, like something older than speech. You sit in the corner one day and realize Donald's English vocabulary has not grown in 2 weeks. It's shrunk. Words he used to know. Cup. Mama. More are gone. Slipped away like sand in water. In their place is a deeper connection to rhythm, to gesture, to mimicry. You write this in your notes. Language regression, environmental influence, imitation override. But the truth nags at you. It doesn't feel like regression. It feels like adaptation. Luella, finally, breaks. She corners Kellogg one night in the hallway. You hear her voice, not raised, but cold, furious, protective. He's not a subject. He's your son. Kellogg doesn't yell back. He just mutters. Science doesn't care about comfort. Luella doesn't respond. She just leaves the room. The next day, no tests, no bells, No clipboards. Gua fidgets, confused by the lack of routine. Donald sleeps in until noon, and no one wakes him. You all sit in the stillness of the living room as rain taps the windows, and for a moment, the house is simply a home again. But the calm doesn't last. Gua begins acting out. She throws toys, bites a cushion, scratches at the door. When Donald tries to calm her, using that same hooting hum, she slaps him. It's the first act of real aggression, and the beginning of the end. That night, Donald refuses to sleep in his bed. He curls into a corner of the couch and rocks himself. He hums, and hums, and hums. You wake in the night to something worse. A screech. Animal. Sharp. You rush to the nursery. Gua is clinging to the top of the dresser, eyes wide, baring her teeth at nothing. Donald is huddled beneath the crib, shaking. Kellogg takes notes. Luella pulls the plug. She calls the primate center the next morning. Gua is to be returned. The experiment is over. Kellogg doesn't argue. He just walks into his study and stays there. You help Luella pack Gua's toys. Her favorite blanket, her stackable cups, her mirror. Gua sits on the floor, quietly watching. No tantrum, no protest, just a strange, deep stillness. When the primate handlers arrive, Gua looks at Donald one last time. He raises his hand, uncertain, then lowers it. She tilts her head, and then she's gone. The silence afterward is suffocating. Luella starts talking to Donald again, slowly, gently. She reads to him, plays music, cooks favorite meals. For days. There's no response. Then, one morning, Donald says a single word. Blue. You cry. Luella cries. Kellogg doesn't come out of his study. Fun fact. Whispered before sleep. In later years, Kellogg would attempt to publish the results of the experiment, but no major scientific journal would take them. The data was too messy, the ethics too questionable, the conclusions too unclear. He wrote in his personal diary, "The experiment failed to show what I'd hoped, but it did reveal something far more important, the fragility of human identity." Donald would go on to recover slowly. He'd never quite forget the strange year he spent being less than a boy and more than a brother. Gua died young, pneumonia. Her body preserved in photographs, her legacy sealed in footnotes. And you lie here now, tucked in, thoughts fading, images dancing on the edge of your mind. The house, the mirror, the child, and the chimp. And the question that still floats unanswered, soft as breath. Who taught who? Good night. Sleep well. Let the question stay unanswered, just for now.